So there are three components to the living room television system. The first, of course, is the television. And then in the cabinet to the right of the television, over in the corner, you'll see that there's three pieces of equipment. The top, the silver box, is the Cox cable box that receives the cable signal. The small black box below that is the DVR player, which you don't need to worry about. And then the bottom box is the Denon audio video receiver. Then there are three remote controllers to control each of those components. Uh, the first one here that says Sony is obviously the controller for the Sony TV. The middle one here, which says Denon, is the controller for the Denon audio video receiver. And the one on the far left is the controller for the cable box, the Cox cable box. Now, this is a closer look at the cable box controller. And this controller is really a universal controller in the sense that you can control more than one device. If you look at the top up here, you see there's a power button, and then there are four buttons for different devices. One's labeled cable, TV, DVD, and auxiliary. So the way this works is that if you first push the button that says cable, this now becomes a remote control for the cable box. So, for example, if you now push the power, after having pushed the cable button, if you now push the power, it'll turn the box on or off. You can toggle back and forth. And similarly, all of the other controls will work to control the cable box. If you now want it to control the TV, you can just push the TV button here, and now it's a TV controller. So if you now push the power button after having pushed the TV button, you're going to turn the TV on or off. And the same thing, the auxiliary button over here refers to the audio video receiver. The DVD button, again, you really don't need to worry about. Now, the only time you should have to use this remote control is if for some reason the cable box didn't turn on when you're going through the startup procedure. As I'll explain in a minute, you can then make this a cable box controller and then power on the cable box if that's necessary. Or the other time you might use it is if once the TV is all up and running, you can actually use this as long as it's acting as a cable controller. That is not TV, but a cable controller. You can then use these buttons to select your channels if you want to. I sometimes find this one's a little bit more convenient than the actual Sony control when I'm trying to navigate around between channels. And also for the guide and the DVR list, if you're going to record anything using the DVR, the digital video recorder in the cable box, or to play things back. But other than that, you shouldn't be turning anything on or off with this or doing anything else with it. Okay, so the way that we're going to turn the TV on normally is to simply use the Sony control and press the green button up in the upper right hand corner, aim it at the TV, and press it briefly. And if all goes well, this will turn all of the components on. And it takes, 10-15 seconds for it to work through. So we'll just watch what's happening as it's going. First it says no signal, check the external input. Now the screen goes black, and now the TV comes on, and then we finally get the sound on. So that's the way it's supposed to work when everything goes well. Okay, so now that the television is on, we need to look at the remote control for the television. Again, that's the Sony controller. And the main buttons that you're going to use, the TV button here, if you push the TV button, it'll take you to live TV. If you push the Netflix button, it ought to take you to Netflix, so you can watch things on Netflix, and this will take you to Google Play. The guide button will take you to the on-screen guide for local programming, tell you what's on various channels of the television. And the one you'll use a lot is the Discover button, because if you push the Discover button, this is going to take you to the portal where you can get to YouTube and the apps, the other apps that we have, You'll also find Netflix there, which is another way to get there. But under the Discover button, in addition to YouTube, you'll also find HBO Go and Amazon Prime. And so you can scroll through those and discover those and get programming from that. That we watch programs on all three of those a lot. And anytime you want to go back to TV, you hit this button to go back. The back button will just take you back to the previous step wherever you were. And I usually try to make it a practice, if you're watching something over here on Amazon Prime, before you finally shut the TV down, is to go back into the TV mode and then shut the TV down from there, because it seems to be a little bit more reliable when you do it that way. So if the television is on, you're watching live television, and now if you want to get to Netflix or Amazon Prime or one of the other applications, as I mentioned before, what you're going to want to do is go down to the controller here and hit this button that says Discover. It's the bottom button. I'm going to do that, and you'll see what happens. This, you'll see across the bottom, this comes up and gives you these choices. And if you look over at this side over here, you'll see that you've got YouTube, Netflix, and then if you use the up and down button, you can scroll down until you get to where it says My Apps, and then you'll see with My Apps you have available Prime Video, HBO Go, or Netflix. So you can select any of those. Let's say, for example, you want to watch Prime Video, you just select that. Again, I'm using the TV controller, and then the Prime Video will come up. Takes a moment, and there's your Prime Video. Now you can make the choices, whatever you want to watch on there. Again, when you're done with that, we'll just go back down here and hit the TV button, and that should take you back to live television. Then when you want to shut everything down, again, you simply use the Sony remote, using the same green button up in the upper right hand corner that you used to turn it on. We're just going to push that button, aim it at the TV briefly, just let it go, and ultimately everything should turn off. And that's what happens when everything is working properly. Now, sometimes when you press the button on the TV controller, all of the proper signals don't seem to be lined up, and the TV doesn't come on, and then you have to troubleshoot what's going on. So the first thing that you should do is just make sure that the television itself is on. Even if you don't see a picture, you may see a sign in the middle that just says Dolby, but just make sure there's power to the television. And then you want to go and look at the front of the audio-video receiver. And what you should see is this display that says cable CBL/SAT. Okay, so if you don't have that display, what you're going to want to do is pick up the Denon remote, and first make sure that the audio-video receiver is actually on. So use the power button here. If it doesn't appear that it's on, press the power button. You might toggle back and forth and make sure that you've got power to the AVR. Next, push the main button to make sure that we have the proper zone that we're controlling. And then most importantly, go over here where you see the cable/SAT button. Push that. And when you've done that, look back at the display in the front of the audio-video receiver, and you ought to see that display that we just saw a minute ago, where it says cable SAT on the front of the box. Now, if you've assured that the television is actually on, that there's power to the television, that it's on, and that the audio-video receiver has the proper input, that is the cable SAT display that we just showed you. The final thing, you want to make certain that the cable box is actually on. So you're going to look at the cable box, and this is difficult to tell if it's on or off. And the only way you can tell is this little white bar here. And when it's on, this bar is going to be up here in the right-hand corner. So that'll indicate that it's on. If you see that the white bar is not up here in this corner and it's here, it's very difficult to read, but what that actually says is standby. And that means that the cable box is not on, which would be another reason why you're not getting a television picture. So again, if the cable box isn't on, you're going to want to go back to the Cox remote control. You're going to want to hit the button that says cable to turn this into a cable box remote control, and then hit the power button, and then check back on the front of the box and make sure that that little white rectangle is moved up into the upper right hand corner, indicating that you now have cable. Now, if none of this works, the next thing I would try to do would be to reset the television entirely. And the way you do that is to use the Sony controller, just the way you turn the TV on. Use the green button the way you would normally do it. But instead of just pushing it for a brief moment, you're going to push the button and hold the button down as long as it takes. This may take 7, 8, 9 seconds. Just continue to hold it down, and then you'll see the screen goes black. Then you can release the button, and then now you just sit back and wait. And you can now see the Sony logo comes up, and it's going to run through its reboot process. And we'll just watch that. You're going to get these little icons up here spinning away. This takes a few seconds. And so there it's come back again. So that's another thing I would try if none of the above works. And then if nothing has worked up to this point, the final thing that I would try is to reboot the entire system. That is the TV, the audio-video receiver, and the cable box and everything. And to do that, if you go over in the corner here, you'll see right down here there's a power strip. And if you just go down here, there's a switch that you can turn off all the power to everything that's connected to the power switch. I've just shut that off and let it sit for 10 minutes or so, and then turn it back on and start over again by trying to turn the TV on, and sometimes this will fix things. Now, if for some reason you should lose the internet connection, you're not going to be able to get to Netflix or YouTube or any of the other applications, so you're going to have to reconnect to the internet. And the way you do that is to use the Denon controller and look for the button that says Setup. And you're going to have to aim this over at the cabinet over to the right of the television. And if you push that Setup button, you'll see that this dialog comes up. And you want to select Network, which is there, and then press the center select button for network and scroll up until you get to connection, and then again press the button. And when you get to connection, you can see that you can connect using Wi-Fi, and when you do that, you can just follow that dialog through. Ultimately, it's going to ask you to select the network that you want, and the one that you want is Boogsy. This can be just like when you connect your telephone or your iPad. And the network is Boogsy, and I've already given you the password for the network, and so you just enter that password and then just follow the dialog through, and you should reconnect. Sometimes I've had to do this a couple of times actually before it'll reconnect, but you'll ultimately get there. Now, if you're going to use the television in the kitchen, it's really simple. There's only two controllers. The top one is the Cox controller. That's what turns the TV on and off, allows you to change stations. The bottom controller is for the audio-video receiver, which is up in the bookcase. And since the sound for the TV goes through the external speakers up in the bookcases, it's this audio-video receiver that controls the sound. But you really don't even need this bottom controller, as I'll show you in just a minute. So if you look at the audio-video receiver itself, which is up in the bookcase, you'll see there's just a power button over here. You can use that to turn it on and off. This big knob here is the volume control. This is the input selector, and you can rotate this, and the different inputs will come up here. You just want to rotate it until you see TV there, and that's what assures that the sound is coming out through the speakers. And that's all there is to the kitchen TV. If you want to watch the television in the hallway downstairs, there are two remote controls for that. The one on the right is, once again, the Cox universal control, and the one on the left is the Sony control for the audio-video receiver, which is hidden away in the cabinet down below the TV. In order to watch the television, you're going to need to turn on three different components. First the cable box, the TV, and then auxiliary, which is the audio-video receiver. And there's a couple of ways to do this. If you hold down the power button, it auto-cycle through and turn all three of these devices on. If for some reason one of them doesn't come on, then you can go back and, just like I talked about earlier, you can, for example, if you want to just operate the cable box, you can hit the cable button and power, or the TV, make it a TV controller and power and so on. But you want to make sure that all three components are on. And when it comes on, it normally defaults to the DVD player. So what you're going to see on the TV screen is usually, not always, but usually it's going to be, you're going to see the DVD player come up there. And so what you need to do then is come over to this controller, the Sony controller, and you want to press the button 3 for the satellite cable TV, and that you should then see the television. Again, just make sure that all three components are on. When you're done watching it, just turn each component off. Again, you can either hold down the power button and watch all three lights flash, or just do each one individually. Now, to operate the television in the bedroom, you're going to use the Cox controller, and there's nothing to this except pushing the power button. You just want to hold it down for a half second or so, not too long and not too short, because it says to turn on both the TV and the cable box. And if you get them out of sync, you'll end up turning the TV on and the cable box off, and vice versa as you go back and forth. But here you can see the startup procedure, and again, this is a smart TV, so it takes a while for it to cycle through everything. So just have patience and it'll finally come on. And then turning it off is the same thing. Just press it for a half second or so.
Steel we need. Certain industries we have to have.
And both the cable box and the TV should go off together. And this is the Cox cable box for the downstairs bedroom. It's very simple. As I say, just the power button is all you need.